for this short presentation on cotton growth management considerations. We've got Jim O'Connor from Adama, who will be talking about RX380, and then we'll have Sandra Williams, who will be giving us a bit of an update on growth control and some of the trial work. Unfortunately, Katie Broughton's come down sick and she won't be available today. So I will now pass over to Jim.
Thanks, Bob. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you that haven't come across me before, my name's Jim O'Connor. I work for Adama Australia. I'm the Market Development Manager for Adama. I live in Toowoomba. My area is southern Queensland and northern New South Wales. Been with Adama for about 7 years now, and previous to that I was a private cotton consultant working in the McIntyre Valley based out of Goondiwindi, and I did that for almost 30 years. So today the team's asked me to just do a review of Adama's growth regulator product RX380. So I'll just do a quick recap on mepiquat chloride, what the RX380 label looks like, some general directions and advice about how to use growth regulators. And at the very end, I will just touch on briefly a little bit of stewardship trial work that we did when we launched RX380 in the 2020-2021 season. RX380 is a 380 gram per litre formulation of mepiquat chloride. Mepiquat chloride, or RX380, interacts with cotton plant hormones. Now, for those of you that are grey like me, you'll remember that the original mepiquat chloride product introduced to the cotton industry was called PIX. Now been replaced by a number of generics, and RX380 is one of the main products that people use and one of the main ways that mepiquat chloride is used in the cotton industry. So gibberellins are a group of plant hormones responsible for growth regulation, and mepiquat chloride interacts with gibberellins by reducing their production, and by reducing the amount of gibberellin in the plant, we reduce the amount of cell elongation. That's the short and the simple part of it, that RX380 regulates the hormone gibberellin in the plant to reduce cell growth. Now, just a little bit of an explanation about what the product is. So it's a soluble concentrate. It's a 380 gram per litre of mepiquat. When PIX was first introduced to the industry, and there are still a number of these products available to cotton growers and agronomists, it was a 38 gram per litre formulation. And as I mentioned earlier, we did a high load of it, increased the strength of it, and reintroduced it to the industry in 2021. So it's a 10x strength of the original formulation, and hence why we did some stewardship work, which I'll present a little bit of data about. So what happens when you apply RX380 or mepiquat chloride to cotton? When applied correctly, we notice that plants get shorter in height, we have shorter internode length, we get some reduction in leaf size, particularly if the plant is experiencing extreme rank growth. You'll get those big dinner plate leaves, and post your application, your leaf size will be smaller, and the chlorophyll will be a bit more concentrated, and you'll tend to get a darker coloured canopy as well. And you can see an example of this on the left-hand side. You can see these dark patches in this trial field, and that's where we've got high rates of RX380 in a replicated trial, and it's just showing the example of how the crop darkens up post the mepiquat chloride application. And we also get a reduction in plant height. So at this trial site, we've got Rob Lomond from Adama pictured in untreated cotton, and then we've got Rob in the same field, but in a replicate that has received 60 mils of RX380 applied at squaring. And this photo was actually taken 50 days post that application. So you can see the impact that it's had. We've had a significant reduction in crop height, even from just one well-timed application of a growth regulator. So what are some of the things that we need to consider when we want to apply a growth regulator to our cotton? And I'll keep this pretty simple. I don't want to step on the information that Sandra will be presenting after me. But just basically, the RX380 label caters for two basic ways of applying. You've got the opportunity to do low rate multiple applications, or you have the opportunity to do one single higher rate application later in the crop development. That's a snapshot of what the label looks like. I'm hoping everyone that uses this product has availed themselves of the label, but you'll be surprised how many people will take a very cursory glance and then go ahead. But if you take the time to read the label, there's quite a bit of information here. What I'm trying to highlight is that we've got some rates available to us, 25 to 60 mils at early squaring, and that's when the label allows you to start applying Mepiquat. Once the crop starts to square, you can then start to consider if you want to use RX380, and you've got that rate range. You've got the opportunity to do a second spray at a slightly expanded rate range once the crop has achieved flowering. So your squaring rates are limited to 25 to 60 mils. Your flowering application rates can be 25 to a litre if you're using a low rate multiple strategy. If you've decided that you just want to use one big hit, you've got this rate range of 75 to 200 mils, and that commences at early flowering right through to cut out to the finish of the crop. And that's quite a common strategy, is for people to wait until they're at 4 nodes above white flower and they consider all their effective flowering is now complete, and they shut the crop down with what we call a cutout application at the end of the season. So what should I consider when I'm using RX380? So if you're in the early season mode and you want to give the crop little reminders as you progress through the cropping cycle, we've got things like the crop vegetative growth rate to consider. The weather's really important because that's what drives vegetative growth or excess growth. The weather forecast and the growing conditions are very important to that. Stress is also important. So what is your potential for stress? And I would suggest that you'd want to avoid stress events immediately post an application of a growth regulator. What your varietal response may be, what's your experience with the particular variety that you're growing? Is it extremely responsive to a growth regulator? Does it need a higher rate or a lower rate? That's probably a bit of an experience thing for you and on your farm, in your situation, in your environment. Fruit load is really important to rank growth. Less fruit, more missing crop fruiting sites will always tend to lead to more vegetative growth. So fruit load or fruit retention is an important one. And your field history. Have I grown rank crops before? When you're making your end of season decisions, things like the date of your last effective flower and what your node above white flower is and its rate of decline, your boll load, your field history, and how much water you've got left, or what your irrigation or moisture levels are currently like, would all be things to bring to the table in your growth regulator decision. From my point of view, I don't think there is an exact recipe for RX380 use in cotton. What was appropriate in a previous year or in a field may not be the best for another field, and may not necessarily carry over from season to season. So it's important to recalibrate yourself each and every time before you make your application. Just make the point here that a good boll load is the best plant growth regulator. Loaded up crops tend not to be as vegetative as crops with lower retention. I get asked this question all the time. It might seem obvious, but I'll just make the point that RX380 or Mepiquat chloride does not shrink existing plant tissue. It'll only affect new growth, and it'll target that expanding tissue, which is in that upper 4 or 5 nodes of the plant. And last but not least, the response to RX380 is influenced by active concentration in the plant tissue. So the bigger the plant, the more RX380 is required, the higher your dose rate needs to be. So we get all that right. What are some of the benefits that we might achieve from a good growth regulator application? Potential yield benefits might result because we've got an easier crop to harvest efficiently. We don't have a big rank plant. We've got a more compact plant that will feed effectively through your picking machinery. You'll get improved canopy and light penetration to your developing fruit, and also some improved air circulation, which could contribute to a healthier environment, less disease, etc. Helpful plant response benefits that you might be chasing to manage your crop: cutout induction, improving crop uniformity, so that allows you to have that easier decision when surrounding defoliation, for instance, or final irrigation. a more compact crop architecture for all the reasons we've spoken about in the previous points. And, and maybe you'll get, it's a simpler plant architecture will improve your spray coverage, whether it's your defoliant, whether it's a foliar fertiliser, or potentially an insecticide or a fungicide. So last but not least, when Adama did their high load of mepiquat chloride, which resulted in the product RX380, we realised that we were now delivering to the market a product that was 10 times the strength of the product that the market had previously been used to. And we wanted to do some work that demonstrated or gave us some information surrounding what if someone put the new product on at the old product rate, i.e. our mepiquat application or our RX380 application ended up being 10 times stronger than what we had intended. What does that mean for our crop? What do I do if that happens to me? We did 3 replicated trials in 3 geographic locations, Narrabri, Gundawindi and Rolleston in central Queensland. And basically what we did is we just looked at the mistake rate, or the rate where we applied the 380 gram formulation at the 38 gram formulation rate, i.e. 10 times, and we compared that to the proper label rate. What we didn't do is do multiple applications to one crop. A treatment was a single application of mepiquat chloride based on the label recommendations. So we did a number of measurements, plant height, nodes above white flower, etc. But I think the most telling one and the easiest one to do in a short period of time is just to look at yield results. So this is our early squaring application. We've picked the 30 mil rate, and the mistake rate here is 300 mils. So just to remind everyone, a 300 mil rate of RX380 is the equivalent of 3 litres of PIX, 3 litres of 38 gram formulation. So one would probably say, oh my gosh, if I put 3 litres of PIX on my crop at early squaring, I'm probably going to lock myself out of any viable yield. And what happened in this trial is it confirmed that some of these high rates can give slight yield depression, and the earlier you apply them, the more likely you are to get some yield depression compared to untreated control. So the light blue bars here are untreated control. Green is the Rolleston trial site, orange is Gundawindi, and purple is Narrabri. So all 3 of these sites were fully irrigated, fully fertilised, quite prone to vegetative growth. And our 30 mil application, our label rate, has resulted in pretty much I don't think 2% yield change is really significant in this trial, but it is what it is. The Rolleston site, we've got a yield depression, and my comment to you is that's because that crop ended up too rank and we lost yield because it was too rank, not because of the 30 mils of mepiquat that was applied at early squaring. And in fact, in that site, you can see here where the mistake rate of 3 litres has actually resulted in a higher yield than the label rate. So that was quite a rank crop. Got a yield benefit at Gundawindi of the mistake rate as well. So, this is quite interesting. But what it does say to me is if you were to make this mistake, I would say to you, just look after your crop. You're going to be fine. There's a good chance that any yield depression you're going to get is minor. And, we may be able to extrapolate that to, hey, if you're trying to make a decision between the 30 mil rate and the 60 mil rate at that stage of that crop in that environment, leaning more into the higher rate would probably give you a better result based on those results. 60 mil rate at that similar timing. So we've gone to the higher end of the of what the label allows. And once again, you can see that we're achieving yield benefit and very little yield reduction in the mistake rate. So we achieved yield benefit over untreated control with all the label recommended rates, and our mistake rates only resulted in 6 to 7% yield reduction at Rolleston and Narrabri. And we actually got a yield benefit at Gundawindi out of 6 litres equivalent of PIX applied at early squaring. This is a summary of the flowering applications. So we've got early flower or first flower and late flower. I've got a line here for the untreated control yield, and you can see 100 mils at first flower, 100 mils at late flower, have all resulted in improved yields over untreated. Mistake rate at first flower has resulted in improved yields at all timings, at all sites. So that's the equivalent of 10 litres of the old picks, or a litre of RX380 applied at first flower. At late flowering, once again, we're getting some yield benefits. I'll just remind everyone these are quite strong growing sites, and the cotton variety was 748 B3F. And then the cutout applications. And once again, the label rate, 200 mils at the Gundawindi site, you see the orange bar, 5% yield reduction, and that crop was 2 rank. That's I can tell you the yield reduction there is because it needed some help along the way. When we put 20 litre equivalent of picks on, or 2 litres of RX380, we still managed to squeak a small yield benefit out of it. So I suppose in summary, that gets me to, that's just a summary of the yields across all those timings. If you're going to have a negative impact, it's going to be on a mistake rate or an incorrect rate made very early in the crop growth cycle. That's where you're more likely to run into some yield penalties. Vegetative control later in the crop is going to have a smaller potential for impact on yield. And I would say to you that based on some of these trial results is that if you're a little bit indecisive about your rate, maybe you can possibly lean towards the higher end of what you're debating. I'm not by any means advocating for you to go crazy and do stuff that you're not comfortable with. But if you're tossing up between, I'll quite get people ring me and say, do I use 30 or 40 mils, Jim? I'll say, well, if it's growing strong, I think the 40 mils is probably going to be the way that I would go based on what I've learned and what I've seen out of this trial work and commercially over the years. Yeah, I think that's probably enough from me, Bob.
Thanks very much, Jim. So we'll just allow Sandra to share her screen.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Jim, for that presentation, and those experiments that you did, they look like so much fun. That is so up my alley, to do 10 times or 20 times a rate or something and see what happens. So you're having way too much fun, Jim. I'd just like to apologise for Katie. She wasn't feeling well today, and I said, that's okay, Katie, just rest up and we'll manage the webinar totally fine. So for those that don't know me, Sandra Williams. So I work with Katie Broughton. We are both in the crop agronomy team with CSIRO, based at the Australian Cotton Research Institute. And just over the last few seasons, we have been doing some experiments with RX380 as well. And I will share some of those results with you in a minute. And before that, because I've been with CSIRO for 30 years, so years ago when Greg Constable was still with CSIRO at the research station, and with the introduction of BT cotton, I actually had a look at the responses of picks to BT cotton compared to conventional crops, which is quite interesting and quite plausible sort of stuff, which I might share a slide on that. So Jim, I think you covered quite a bit of what RX380 does and some of the considerations. So some of these slides, I might just have a look at them. And if you've already covered it, I'll just sort of skip a little bit. This slide here is just saying, why you would use growth crop and why you would need to probably control it. And I think the first thing that I probably need to say is that really early in the season, maintaining good vigorous growth is actually quite important, because it is the roots and the leaves and the stems and all that sort of stuff that does actually feed the fruit later on. So it really is important to get some good growth. And normally, once you have a good fruit load, like Jim said, normally it's the best PGR. It will slow your growth. But in quite a few cases, and I've seen quite a few over the years, that if you didn't use a growth regulator, you would not get a crop because of field history, etc. So this happens when you've got a fruit load, but you've got more resources above the needs of that fruit load. And that's when you get lush vegetative growth. And that's where RX380 comes in. PICS decisions, or RX380, like we call it now, really, it's caused a lot of debate over the years. And I think it's because there's no one recipe, like Jim said. Everyone sort of uses it in a bit different way. Everyone's had different experiences with it. Every field's different and every season's different. And there's so many different little considerations. What we've got in the middle of the Australian Cotton Production Manual is a couple of flow charts, and these flow charts have been in there for quite some years, and it's something that Mick Bange and I sort of figured out. It just lists the considerations basically and goes through what you would think about when you're considering applying PICS and considering the rate to use as well. And like Jim pointed out, the early flowering decision tree is way different from the cutout, and this is going to be include squaring hopefully in the next version of the Australian Cotton Production Manual too, because that's what Katie and I have been playing around with for the last couple of seasons as well. But yeah, the early flowering decision tree incorporates your, what is your plant doing? And for years and years and years, in the guidance of Mick Bange, we have measured vegetative growth rate, because if you're measuring your height and your nodes weekly, it's not too late to apply a PGR if your VGR is increasing over 5.5. So I guess that's one of the first things. I think probably before that is stress. Like if you've got really hot weather coming up, you can't get your water on, or if it's going to be waterlogged, etc. Like I think that's probably if you're going to order your considerations, it would probably be your main one. The field history, like if that crop, or if that tail drain, that part of the crop is going to be rank, that you have to control that. I think that would be the next one on my list. The next one is, like I said before, fruit retention. A good fruit load is your best way of controlling the vegetative growth. If you do have like a wave of mirids come in, really watch your heights and nodes for your VGR, because it's likely to explode basically. And the other one, variety responsiveness. I haven't really had an experiment where I've tested a whole heap of varieties, so I really can't comment on that. It's probably the lowest on my priority list if I'm going to think about early flowering or squaring decisions. Going back to squaring decisions though, just from experience, you're never going to get a plant with pinhead squares or just starting to square that's over 5.5 in your VGR. So it's a little bit of a different decision of keeping that in check. And it seems to be working over the last couple of years in our experiments anyway, which I'll go into if I've got some time. The squaring flowchart might be a little bit different to that. And cut out, like Jim said, looking at your last effective flower, are you on track with your decrease in your nodes above white flower? And basically you really need to match up the date of your last effective flower with your rate of decrease of your nodes above white flower, and if it's not looking like it's going to match up, then a good rate of RX380 might help. Jim mentioned the effects of RX380. One thing that I would say is we've had a bit of a play around with the 253 B3XF variety, and it has really, really long. The length of each branch between each position of fruit is really long, and the RX380 certainly shortens it up as well to allow better light penetration. So it works a treat on that particular variety. And the other variety as well, it will shorten the distance between your fruit positions. This is what I was talking about before, where years ago with Greg Constable, well, he did a mepiquat chloride yield response curve, and that's the blue one that you can see. So this is back in the conventional days where you were missing so much fruit that the plant was just having an absolute party with vegetative growth. And if you didn't apply mepiquat chloride, you would lose yield. And so this is just saying that as your VGR increases over that 5.5, when you did apply it, you would get a good yield response. And if you didn't, you would get a bad one. The black line is just showing the data that Mick and I discovered years ago. And it's all about retention, really, because you did have the fruit there to keep it in check. So if you did apply it, your yield response was less. Okay, some interesting stuff. So not last season, the season before, Katie and I were tasked to do some grower grower-led, consultant-driven experiment. So we ended up having a bit of a play in cotton at Cecil Plains Wee Waa, over at Aberdeen, believe it or not, and down at Griffith. And we met a lot of nice people and learnt so much from that. So because it was grower-driven, consultant-driven, we left it up to the guys as to, well, if we were to do an experiment in that field, what would you want to know? And I guess the main one that came out of these collaborations was, yeah, we want to know how early we can go, how high a rate we can go, and what is it going to do to our final yield and final maturity. So that was all interesting. Planting dates. So the early applications, we were looking at 60 mils compared to 25 mils in some instances, early squaring with your RX380 compared to a control. Cecil Plains missed out on a spray, so that's why Cecil Plains doesn't have like an arrow across with a date. But we certainly got those sprays down at Wee Waa, Aberdeen and Griffith. Then we've got flowering. So we also went with 60 mils compared to a lower rate. So treatment 1 was control, treatment 2 was your high rate, treatment 3 was your low rate. And then on 3 different occasions, there was some cutout rates as well. So in a lot of instances, we had 3 sprays. Straight to some results. There wasn't actually any real significant differences in total retention at Cecil Plains at all. A little bit at Wee Waa, where we had a little bit of a higher retention with your high rate and your low rate of RX380. Down in Griffith, we got a little bit of an increase in, we've jumped over to yields, that's okay. So Cecil Plains, there was no difference in yields as of Wee Waa. Griffith, there was a bit of a trend towards higher yields in your high rate, but particularly your low rate and those regimes that I mentioned a couple of slides ago. And Aberdeen, there was more of a difference between quite a low yielding and quite patchy under a big pivot. It was a 606 compared to the 748. It was the main difference there, not so much any of the RX380. So that was all fun and that was all good. But one thing that we realised from doing those grower-led experiments was that a lot of the, particularly down in Griffith, they really, really wanted more of a compact plant that they could pick in a timely manner and you wouldn't lose a lot of yield. So we sort of got thinking that this could be a really good experiment to look at something that's like really resource use efficient. So have a look at growing a really compact plant compared to like something that does what it wants to do, looking at applying half the amount of nitrogen and looking at skipping and irrigation. So we wanted to have a water use, nitrogen use efficient plant that didn't decrease in yields. So this is what we did in the 24-25 season, and we're doing this again in the 25-26 season. So I have just applied my first lot of RX380 to some early squaring cotton last week, and it was a 60 mil in the compact treatment. And yesterday we side dressed another 200 kilos of N, so units of N on the maximum treatment. It's a fun experiment to be involved with. We do septometer readings weekly. We do heights and nodes weekly. We've even got some cameras in there, thanks to Alison McCarthy, that will measure heights and nodes one day for us. But at the moment, we're alongside the cameras measuring heights and nodes. And then we'll do full plant biomasses at flowering, at cutout and 60% open to get a really, really good snapshot of how it's grown, what's happened, and how resource use efficient the compact actually was compared to the control and the maximum. So it's a fun experiment. Another thing that we've done this year, the photo on the left, that's a little wash bay room that we've got at the research station, and they're washing roots. So we've had a glasshouse experiment looking at different rates of RX380 at squaring and at flowering, and we've got to do our second root wash tomorrow, and that's the flowering spray. So Katie and I were looking at a paper from Brazil, and Brazil did some really good glasshouse studies looking at 3 different rates of PICs, and it showed the mepiquat chloride rates applied at squaring slightly reduced the root mass And then the mepicot chloride rates at flowering slightly increased. As the rates increased, the root increased at flowering. So we are going to try to replicate this Brazilian paper. So that's all fun stuff. The photo on the right, so this is another RX380 experiment. Jim, you're going to have a look at this. This is just above Moree. Greg Bramley's helping us here from CottonInfo. I don't know whether you're online, Greg, but thank you for all your work. So, yeah, this is up on a big flat dryland area up at Jeff Manchie's, and we've got an experiment down to try to get a really compact, efficient crop that they can strip really quickly. And so this is part of a Future Drought Fund project, and it's going to be fun. I'll probably put the first squaring spray on next week, just before Christmas. And there's a crew heading up there. I think I'm in part of that too tomorrow to put our sea probes to measure water use efficiency up there. And with that, I'd just like to acknowledge my immediate crop agronomy team. They're absolutely fabulous. And just acknowledge all the growers that helped us out with those experiments in 23-24 at Cecil Plains, Aberdeen, just out at Togo and down at Griffith.
Thanks very much, both Jim and Sandra. We're going to open up to questions now.
Sandra, if I could ask one, Bob, I was just wondering what your parameters were for that dryland experiment that you talked about at the end, and creating a stripper-friendly, compact dryland crop. What's your parameters there? What are you chasing? Have you got a height in mind or a total node?
Yeah, so in discussion, with Rob and Jeff, we want to stick to below 80 centimetres with the ideal treatment. And like I said, we're measuring water use as well. So hopefully we can get that efficiency data, because it is a Future Drought Fund project. So we do need to get that water data as well. We did get some gravimetric soil cores last week for starting water. We'll be doing heights and nodes each week, and we'll also be doing probably 3 lots of biomasses as well in that. I haven't got the protocol in front of me, but I think the compact is about 3 different applications starting now.
And then across all treatments, you'd have a standard pest control, so you'd sort of you eliminate anything that's happening there with regard to retention.
Yeah. So the whole field there will be treated.
Is there any value in manipulating retention to maximise retention to see if that has an impact? As best you can. I know that's can all be a bit up to the environment, but yeah.
Yeah, we could do. It could be another thing in the pipeline as well, like on an irrigated. Yeah, I'm not too sure. And I think maybe we didn't talk too much about the difference between dryland and irrigated as well. I think just over the last few years it's getting a little bit more popular in the dryland space, but it's still, I guess you got to be more cautious with any stress events if you are wanting to put a bit of RX380 on dryland. It's a little bit more cautious there. But all the other principles are exactly the same, except you're going to get a little bit more stresses. You probably, if you do get a lush season because of the spacing, you might really need it as well.
If you can demonstrate increased root mass, that'd be fantastic for the water, rain-grown production systems. Obviously.
Yeah.
That'd be really cool.
So along with the Future Drought Fund field work, we'll be doing a deficit glasshouse experiment measuring root growth. So this one that we've just done, it's fully watered, fully irrigated in the glasshouse. But this next one, it's a fun one where you're weighing plants and you're dispensing the exact amount of water for the deficit that you want. So it's a lot more work, but it'll be some really good data coming out of that. I'm not too sure when we're going to start that. It might even be next season, Jim, because we've just got a little bit too much on our plate.
I think, and I don't want to dominate the time, but the one thing that I probably didn't summarise or wrap up in my part was that I so often get calls from people who have got to the end and they've got a big rank plant and they're trying to pull it up at the end, and it's really challenging. It's really hard. and being a little proactive and doing all the measurements that you've talked about today, understanding what your vegetative risk is like, and getting on the front foot early is the way to manage crop size, that's for sure.
Jim, there's a question there on how long does it take to metabolise in the plant? You might answer that one.
Yeah, it'd be pretty rough, Bob. I don't have any replicated trial work, but I always ran a rule of thumb of about 2 weeks, as I don't think I'd double down and retreat something inside 14 days. I think it takes that long to see the full effect. I hope that answers Andrew's question.
Did you?
I don't know how you feel about that, Sandra, but I don't have trial work across different varieties. I'm sorry, Andrew.
Yeah, I don't either. Well, I've got the mic. So I've got a comment here or a chat here. What measurements are you looking at, Sandra, when applying at first square? Well, we do heights and nodes from very early on, but like I said, you will never get like a large VGR at first square. But with our compact treatment, we know that to get it really compact, you do need to be on the front foot and you do need to start applying it early. And so that's why we started with first square. So there's no real magic measurement unless you've got one, Jim.
All I would say is that probably the guys in the north, and I'm talking about Western Australia, Kununurra, have been dealing with this really high level of vegetative growth and having trouble, coming up with a management system. And some of their discoveries made, and this is work that's been done where applications are made prior to squaring, which surprised me. I didn't think I'd get a plant response from a pre-squaring application, but they certainly have been demonstrating that. Paul Grundy's work has been demonstrating that. Et al., and there's been others involved, has been demonstrating some positive impacts on vegetative growth with pre-squaring applications of Mepiquat. So I think that's still a space that they're trying to understand.
Another question there from Scott.
Yeah, look, I agree, Scott. I think fields with varying soil types from light reds to grey vertisols can benefit from variable rate. The more vegetative growth or the bigger the plant, the higher the rate to get the response. That was certainly one of the first things we played with variable rate stuff out of planes, and when we started mapping crops 20 years ago probably, but it never really caught fire. But if you've got a high variable field, I think there's real value in pursuing that kind of technology and that kind of a tactic, just so you get that nice even crop at the end, for sure. The only thing I would say that maybe I know that I feel like I know now, or I don't know, but we always used to be a bit concerned about overdosing the small cotton. I don't know that I'm as, based on what we just looked at 20 minutes ago, whether I am as worried. So maybe you could get away with a dose that meets your biggest crop and not get as worried about what you're applying to your smaller crop. But I wouldn't take that as general advice, particularly if that smaller crop is getting a bit stressed, that you could get some pretty dramatic impact. So I'm going to say I like the variable rate idea. I reckon it's a good one, and I reckon that's worth pursuing. I think maybe you've probably done some work in that space, Sandra.
No, not really, not with variable rate.
Gracie, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I was the measurement at first square.
Got you. So are you thinking about pre-squaring applications in your geographic region, or is this something that you've come across in the far north?
No, neither really. I think we've probably come to the same discovery kind of in the stuff that you looked at, Jim, where we can apply probably a bit more picks and actually have a yield response even earlier on. So, we are pushing the boundaries, I guess, with how early we are applying whilst trying to toe the fine line of not stressing anything out. So, was just curious to see, what I guess maybe a threshold might be, but kind of thought it might be as what you mentioned, Sandra, kind of a bit more of a feel or, growth stage rather than any kind of measurement.
Yeah, that's right. So just a quick question, Jim, about your experiments where you had the accidental rates. Did you guys measure like days from planting to 60% open or maturity, because what we've found is that there are significant differences in it will mature a couple of weeks earlier, so you'll be able to defoliate earlier, be able to get the picker on earlier.
Yeah, we didn't see that as much, Sandra. I think maybe in our most extreme we've got 7 days out of the high rates of flowering, where we had the biggest sort of reductions. But it just goes to show how vegetative these experimental crops were that were involved in our series. And I definitely preface that data that we looked at around that. Like, you start adding a lot of significant water, environmental type stresses in there, the picture could get a little bit more skewed, that's for sure. But I agree, I think there can be an element of earliness associated with it being timed right. Yeah. And I've heard Gracie's comments around the traps for years now, with smart managers leaning into these low rates early, setting crops up for higher yields, and it's a thing that people are really feel strongly about. I believe. I think the work that you're doing around root development would maybe help set some boundaries there, and that, whilst there might be a bit of a tipping point as to going too hard and maybe making some sacrifices in water use and nutrient conversion efficiency with impacts on roots. But look, I think that's so preliminary at this stage, it's hardly worth talking about, is it? But it'd be something that'd be interesting to find out.
Jimmy, do you want to just mention about application timing in relation to irrigation, since we're just in the middle of first and second irrigation?
Yeah, Bob, I think Sandra touched on it as well. I would just be conscious about stress. So if I was going, particularly if I was loading a crop up, I had a crop that I was going to hit with a reasonably high rate. So I'm going to put a pretty big hormonal stress on that plant. My risk management would say to me, what's my likelihood that I'm going to have an issue with irrigation timing here? Does the pump break down on this farm all the time? Does this farmer, is he always successful at hitting his targets? Or what's the weather doing? Am I potentially running into one of these storms where, we could water the farm and then get waterlogged for 2 or 3 days, plus have 200 mils of RX380 applied to it, or 100 mils at early flowering. So I think that's probably what you're asking, Bob. And it's certainly impossible to totally manage risks like that, but it's certainly a factor. Yeah. So I would tend to make my applications post-irrigation when I've got that, my next window for my next watering is 7 to 10 days away, and I can, let the crop get out of that post-watering malaise and be firing away. That's the time to make your application if you can. And then you've got that nice window where you're not thinking about watering again for a while. And if in 3 or 4 days you happen to get a shower of rain, at least you're 20 or 30% of your way into your deficit, and you're going to handle your waterlogging a lot better as well, minimise any stresses that you can't account for associated with your application of Mepicquat.
Thanks, Jimmy. I just might get a comment from Am or Stu McFadden just in relation to the varieties. I could probably make a couple of comments, but not in relation to this. I think you just got to be aware of what, the indeterminacy of your varieties in terms of the way they grow in the field. Obviously, there's varieties that are slightly more determined in the way they grow, and they're typically grown in those areas, in the shorter season areas. You just got to be careful in terms of when you're applying growth control on those varieties and what stress loads are being applied to those crops. Look, time's about up. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining in here today in this webinar. If you want more webinars like this, please get onto that group map which is in the link, and please put in what you want. We've had some really good workshops recently that have looked at the bug checker workshop, area wides which are going on around the place with all the REOs conducting meetings. So please contact your local REO person, or put stuff in the link to what do you want next in terms of webinars. Thank you very much, everyone, and certainly thank you to Sandra and Jim. Bye for now.